Number one, top soft skills, resilience. Now I'm reading the definition from Ionos' website about resilience, then I'll talk about it. So from Ionos, quote, "You work a lot, but rarely find it overwhelming. In times of increased expectations, you manage to fulfill requirements without suffering from a subsequent drop in performance. You face unforeseen events and developments with determination and have a high stress tolerance." That is in bold, high stress tolerance. This also makes you a role model for less resilient colleagues. Every employer appreciates reliable employees who can withstand turbulent times. All right, now I'm out of the description, close quote. Now this one, resilience really relates to the subject of mental toughness, which I talk about all the time. I wrote a book on mental toughness. I call it the Mental Handbook. And I talk about mental toughness in damn near everything that I put out. I talk about mental toughness. I did a chapter on mental toughness in my book, Work on Your Game, which you can get at workonyourgamebook.com. And often people use phrases like resilience, perseverance, grit, mental toughness. They use them interchangeably. This description that I just gave you could apply to any one of those four phrases that we use all the time. The biggest thing that I want to point out here is what was in bold that I repeated there. High stress tolerance. How much challenge can you deal with? How much of things not going your way can you deal with before you start to fall apart? What is your IQ? I heard a businessman pose this question on a stage years ago, probably 20 years ago. And he said to the audience, "What is your IQ? Does not mean your intelligence quotient, how smart you are. Your IQ stands for I quit." How much shit needs to occur in your life or your business or a situation for you to throw in the towel and stop trying? How much stress can you handle? In episode number 1691, I gave you 3 keys for eliminating stress and anxiety. In episode number 1450, I told you how to remain positive and calm when everyone around you is anxious and stressed out. In episode number 1348, we talked about the concept of the eustress, which is the positive kind of stress that you actually create on purpose in order to build your mental toughness and expand your comfort zone. And episode number 718, I talked about how stress can be a sign of weakness when it's the wrong kind of stress and you're allowing that stress to break you down and send you in the wrong direction. And also episode 351, we talked about stress testing, putting yourself in stressful situations to find out what you're actually made of at this point, to see where your weaknesses are and where you need to get better. This all goes under the concept of resilience. And understand that if any of you watched the Michael Jordan Last Dance documentary, Michael Jordan / Chicago Bulls documentary in the spring of 2020, about a year ago from now. And one of the main things Michael's teammates always said about Michael Jordan was that his presence is what gave confidence to everybody else. This is the exact thing that Ionos is talking about right here. Dealing with unforeseen events and developments, and you are a role model for less resilient colleagues. So did anybody on the Chicago Bulls have Michael Jordan's resume? Of course not. Did anybody on the Bulls have Michael Jordan's talent or accomplishments? Or did any of them have the right to have the swagger that Michael Jordan had? Absolutely not. But whenever you hear from any of Jordan's teammates from back then, they all say the same thing. Michael provided the confidence. Michael provided the toughness. Because he had so much, everybody else was able to be confident. Michael had resilience times a million. And because he had resilience times a million, all of his teammates were able to be resilient because they knew if anything went wrong, if anything went left, they always knew number 23 was going to handle things in the end. And that's exactly what happened. And every employer, this is what Iono says, every boss appreciates reliable employees who can withstand turbulent times. Any of you who's ever, I can't even say it that way, but any of you who ever has been in a position of hiring, let's say this, you're in a position of hiring someone, whether you're the owner of the company or maybe you're a manager, you're working in HR, one of the main things you look for, of course you look for skill, you look for someone who has a solid background, a resume, and maybe they have experience doing the job you're hiring them for, but you also want to know how well this person works under pressure. How well is this person going to work when the job is not as easy as it sounded on the application? How is this person going to deal with things not going according to the employee documentary handbook and they had to think on their feet and kind of figure out what to do right there on the spot? How is that person going to respond? A lot of times we don't know how that person's going to respond until they get thrown into the fire. There's a guy I know, one of my friends down here in South Florida, his name is Shota. He's a boxing trainer. And one of the things that he tells me whenever we're talking about boxing, he's very enthusiastic about boxing. And one of the things that he says is the same way that you would know like a dog, any of you who's ever knows anything about dog training, like canine training for police dogs, that they can tell when the cops are training the police dogs, they can tell which dogs have the internal makeup to be police dogs and which ones don't. They can tell from a very, very young age if this dog even has the makeup to do it. And there's some kind of test that they do, like they surprise the dog or do something that puts the dog in what would maybe be a stressful situation, and they see how the dog responds. And if the dog responds a certain way, they say, okay, this dog can move on in the training. And if the dog responds a different way, they're like, all right, this dog can't move on. And one of the things that I heard Shota, the boxing trainer, he says, when you put somebody in that ring, the first time they get hit in the face, or the first time they realize that they're in the ring with a fighter who can probably fuck them up, you find out whether this person has what it takes to become a boxer or not, based on the way that they're responding to that stressful situation. And it's the same thing for all of us. Michael Jordan used to say this. He said this in many of his books. And I've read every Michael Jordan book, not just the ones written about him, but the ones written by him. And one of the things that he said in one of his early books was that, a lot of times players will say to me, Michael Jordan speaking, they'll say, yeah, I'm going to play better next game. Yeah, I'm going to play better. And then they get in that next game, they miss their first 2 or 3 shots, and you can see it in their face that they've lost all their confidence. And that was Michael's way of knowing, all right, this guy doesn't quite have the resilience that I have as Michael Jordan, so I'm going to have to provide a little bit to him because otherwise we're not going to win. So it's just reading that resilience in other people, and that matters a lot in the work world, especially when you're working with other people. You want to know how resilient the people around you are. Even in relationships, you want to know this because nobody's life is perfect. I don't know anyone who's listening to this, at least those that I've heard from. I don't know anybody whose life has gone perfectly. So you want resilient people around you, so when things do go left, and they will go left, everybody's not jumping overboard.